is episode 47 of the Fire Protection Podcast, powered by InspectPoint. Today, my guest is Travis Montembeault. Travis is the director of FireConnect. Essentially, it's a digital innovation for Peerless fire pumps, and just not only fire pumps, but they're going beyond just fire pumps. Really kind of like the IoT, Internet of Things side of Peerless. Really cool what they're doing. I've kind of been in the loop on this for the last few years, and they're finally coming to market with connecting fire pumps, giving more of that information to the building owners, to AHJs, and obviously to the servicing contractors or inspection contractors. So really cool to see what Peerless is doing and finally taking this to the commercial side of the market. We get really into it on obviously what IoT is, Internet of Things, what makes a fire protection system smart, and kind of comparing it what's on the market now, and kind of what data they're grabbing from these from FireConnect. One highlight, just to kind of plug it, but they connect with a wide variety of fire pump controllers, right? It's not just a specific brand. It's kind of more open, which I think IoT is kind of doing that, and I think just fire protection should be doing that. The more open, the better fire protection we're going to get. So we didn't get too deep into the details. So actually on December 7th this year, we're going to be doing a detailed webinar of FireConnect to kind of see it in action, and some of their dashboards that they're working on, and some of the fun things we're doing here at InspectPoint as well. So yeah, it was a great chat with Travis, and I do hope you enjoy this podcast. It's kind of a look into the not too far down into the future with fire protection inspections and fire pump technology. So quick plug on InspectPoint. Between now and in the end of the year, this is being released in the first part of November, but between now and the end of the year, we are running some specials. So if you do, if you are in the game for inspection or service software, please reference this podcast. You'll get an extra few months off of your next annual subscription. So appreciate the listenership, and please like and subscribe. Thanks. All right, here we go.
All right.
Travis, thanks for joining me today on the Fire Protection Podcast.
Yeah, Drew, pleasure to be here. Really good.
Yeah, I almost said Fire Sprinkler Podcast. I'm actually doing Chris Logan's show later today. So I'm it's my podcast day, I guess. So
there you go. Yeah, well, glad to be here. Looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, Travis, he's with Peerless Pump. Is Peerless part of Grundfos still, or is?
Yeah. So Peerless is a business unit and a division within the Grundfos family. So Grundfos bought Peerless in 2007, end of 2007, and then has really reinvested in the Peerless brand and name, and set them up as basically a division operating within the company.
Gotcha. So Grundfos does a wide variety of pumps, and then Peerless is like their fire pump specific.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of people probably know Grundfos if you're in the fire pump business, because most of the jockey pumps, pressure maintenance pumps, are Grundfos CRs typically, is what you'll find in most pump rooms. So whether you've got a Peerless fire pump there or not, probably 8 out of 10 times you're looking at a Grundfos CR as well for your jockey.
Yeah, I knew a lot of Peerless just being in, and that's where I met you initially in New York City, is like the number one pump city in America, right?
Yeah, it's massive. It's massive. And so I covered New York and really the Northeast market for the Peerless fire pump team for about 7 years as a sales manager. So covering up New England, New York, Philly, that area, and then I've since rotated out of that role and into leading our digitalization effort, which is what we're going to talk a little bit about today. But Peerless FireConnect. It's been a product for many years for Peerless, but they decided to take an investment about a year and a half ago to form it as its own business unit, put a full team behind it to really lead the digital transformation of Peerless effectively here. And so FireConnect is the first of what hopefully will be many smart connected solutions that come from Peerless. So we've been doing that for about a year and a half. Yeah.
So they're doing more than just FireConnect. They're looking at some other connected solutions as well.
Yeah, and so Peerless is not just a fire pump manufacturer. We also manufacture, water, for water utility, vertical turbines for municipal applications, wastewater, and then there's the industrial side of the business as well. So process pumps, process water,
Yep.
ANSI equipment, things like that. So the fire portion of the business is what a lot of people know Peerless for, but the Muni is also quite large. So when we talk about digital efforts, fire is kind of the low-hanging fruit because within the fire pump room, this hasn't really occurred industry-wide at this point here. But in our other market segments, there's certainly opportunity as well.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, and I feel like, well, in this case, fire protection might be is Peerless rolling with the fire protection, the Fire Connect first, versus usually I feel like municipality and just water usage that usually comes first because there's a dollar value to that, right? Versus fire protection usually lagging on the technology side.
Yeah, typically, right? And I think
Right.
that's why you see maybe don't want to call it a lack of innovation, but maybe slow to move from a
Yep.
market standpoint in general, industry wide with regard to fire. And so when Peerless was assessing opportunities for, digital efforts, there was a real gap that we've seen market wide on the fire protection industry side. There's all sorts of condition monitoring and other types of, remote, applications that come from other industrial uses. I mean, water utility and municipalities have been monitoring their pumps remotely and controlling them remotely for literal decades.
Wow.
Similarly for industrial facilities, but specific to fire, that in our industry has lagged on that. And so when Peerless was taking a look at what opportunities existed, this looked like the best opportunity for immediate growth and immediate impact.
Yeah. Yeah. I think ever since Inspect Point's been around, I've kind of like, all right, well, I know this is coming, the connected fire pumps and grabbing some of that data because it's one of the most critical components of a fire protection system. If you need a fire pump, right? Um, if you don't have water, you don't have sprinkler system, you don't have different suppression systems as well. So by getting that connected uh, and grabbing data out of it, it's going to make it a lot. Plus, the frequency of inspection on fire pumps and just the nature of making sure that's working properly, it's going to affect everything down the line, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the reality of fire pumps are they rarely run unless you truly need them to run
Yeah.
or you're within your inspection times. So there's all this kind of, lag in between inspections effectively where that equipment's just sitting idle. It's not like a process pump or a booster system in a high-rise building that's running day
Right.
in and day out.
Right.
So there's potential for issues to come up and occur without actually knowing it until you get to the next inspection cycle.
Right. Yeah. And that just I feel like that's what lags the industry is just the well, sorry, the lagging the industry. Obviously the inspection cycle. I'm talking the code cycle. That's what's lagging the industry. That's a whole other topic.
Oh yeah, for
But
sure.
um, so I guess all right, Fire Connect's a smart fire protection system. I guess what everybody's kind of used to some of the um, Internet of Things, the IoT technology. Um, what is this in comparison to like I guess what you have in your house, right?
Yeah, that's great, and that's a great opening because I usually when I give a presentation on this, I'll pull my phone out and show it up and say, look, I'm getting a notification right now that there's motion in front of my front door.
Yep.
I can get a notification that I've left my garage door open for an hour, or that I've left my trunk for my car open. That comes as a push notification from my app.
Yep.
Um, Everything there is connected, and I'm not constantly checking my apps, but they're bringing issues or concerns or condition changes to the forefront for me when I need to know them. So I'm not constantly looking at my, the app for my car and saying, oh, okay, I left the trunk open, but instead it's telling me that I did it. So it's
Right.
getting proactive. What we're trying to do with FireConnect, which, in essence is remote monitoring of your fire pump and your fire protection system. That the basis of it was fire pumps are in essence a black box for a lot of people. What's trapped in those four walls outside of your core NFPA 72 alarms is an immense amount of data.
Yep.
And most people don't have access to that data unless they physically go to the pump room, look at the controller, look at the gauges, look at the clipboard that's hanging on there from the last test. Um, that is the old way of doing things. And so what FireConnect is trying to do is to take all of that information and let you see it from wherever you are in the world. So I can log onto my app if I'm in, out of the country and see what's going on. Or even better yet, that system can tell me if something's going on. So if I'm,
Right.
3,000 miles away, I can get a text message that says, "Hey, your pump's on," and you can dive in immediately and see what the scenario is. Are you flowing water? Is there other alarms on the controller? What's driving that issue? And so then it
Interesting.
gets even better because in a post-COVID world where one, we've seen for a couple of years how difficult it is to get building access, and two, it's very difficult to keep employees right now. That
Yeah.
becomes your one constant. So then you can still see what's going on with your system, even if you're struggling to get access into a building or it takes time to get somebody out there.
Right. Right. Well, just the frequency of fire pumps with the weekly and monthly, the churn tests and no flow. Who's doing that? I think there's not enough technicians to do those now. So are the internal facility managers or property owners doing them? I think a lot of good ones are, but there's just not enough people to do some of those more frequent activities, you know.
For sure. And I mean, this remote monitoring concept, even with regard to code, and then also with Peerless and Grunfus originally, started for fire protection after the National Fire Protection Association's research foundation. They commissioned a study, and I think they found some high number. I can't remember the percentage off the top of my head. Sorry, I think it was probably close to somewhere around 40%. We're struggling to get, or we're not getting the required inspection, testing, and maintenance
Yep.
work done across
Yep.
the board. And so we know the good ones really do it, and then there's plenty that slip through. And I mean, I can give you a quick story. I was with a customer about a month ago, and he was telling me how just a week prior he had received a phone call that he had a common trouble alarm. The site leader had a common trouble alarm and said, "Hey, I don't know what's going on here." And he goes, "Oh, well, there's a problem with your fire pump." And the guy responds to my customer and says, I don't have a fire pump in my building." And and he goes, "Well, I'm sure you do, but let me come out there and we'll take a look." And he gets out there a day later and gets on site, and they're walking down the site and they find the fire pump room, and in there is a diesel fire pump that's 15 years old, and it's got 1.2 hours on the engine. So they commissioned it and they never ran it again.
Oh my
The thing that
gosh.
triggered that alarm was the chargers in the controller finally died and the
Oh
batteries lost
wow.
their voltage. And so that was what triggered that common trouble alarm, which led to the phone call and so on and so forth. So the point is a lot of people just don't know. They're not looking at this equipment. They're not testing it. So it's there, but is it ready? Probably not. So bringing larger visibility to the forefront of your systems is just going to lead to better protection for all at the end of the day. And then you start thinking at a corporate level and an insurance level, risk mitigation becomes
Oh
a big
yeah.
thing, right? And that just, you know, improved data and visibility. Some may look at it as big brother, but the reality is it is going to drive, I think, good change industry wide.
Yeah, and you know what? If we got to hit these, specific frequencies of inspection per the code, like some of them are like those weeklies and monthlies, they're yes, if there's an issue, you need somebody there, right? And they in the new 2023 NFPA 25, they put there's a whole section for remote remote monitored automated testing, right,
Yeah.
for the fire pump. And how quick can you get somebody there if there's a condition, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's a massive change because it used to
huge
be that
change.
somebody
Yeah.
somebody had to be on site within 5 minutes,
Yes.
right? But the new version of the code says that somebody can address those issues within 4 hours if you're monitoring them remotely. And so that really opens up the door for this possibility of one, remote monitoring is exactly what it is. It's just a window into the system, but it really opens up the door for things like remote testing all of a sudden
Yes.
because you're monitoring, allowing for scheduled automatic tests of your fire pump, for example, and
Yep.
then just knowing that you have to go address them if something comes up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Back to just smart personal systems. My neighbor brought it up. He's like, he just got a new car, and he has it on his app that he just in the wintertime he starts his car, you know 15 minutes before he's got to leave. So the cars are like it's on the app. I didn't even know you could do that.
Mhm.
But it's like everything's so connected now that might as well utilize the technology, and it's going to improve everybody's life, right? And improve the safety as well.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, it's a narrative change that, will transform the industry at the end of the day. And I think the reality is that whether we like it or not, it will come. Because this is kind of the last frontier for especially on the pump side of the business for
Yeah.
IoT and connected solutions. It's been, almost non-existent for fire protection, more or less, compared to, your industrial pumps like we talked about, and monitoring those and using an app. You can control industrial pumps. For fire, a different story. Right now, you're still just looking. You're not turning it on. You're not turning it off. But you're still gathering that data from a condition standpoint.
So are you, on an NFPA 25, no flow test or no flow, churn test, whatever. Yeah, there's not many, there's some checks and balances you have to do. There's not obviously not as many as an annual. You're able to grab whatever data almost instantaneously, right? So you're going to
Yeah,
be able to provide a lot more. You'll be able to provide pressure data, you'll be able to provide temperature data, a bunch of other things that, normally takes, maybe take, 20, 30 minutes, but
for
you're going
sure.
to be able to pull that pretty much instantly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's always the point is that one, it's always there from an inspection standpoint, and two, it's always there in between those inspection times, right? So all the, the week or the 3 or 4 weeks in between inspections,
Right,
that data is also available. So then you can start to see condition changes if something goes wrong in between inspections, so that you're getting more proactive as opposed to reactive when issues pop up. So you'll know right away if something happens. So from your question, what we're doing is we're going from digitization to digitalization in reality. So why, it used to be someone walking around with a clipboard and looking at the gauges and checking it off, and then now it's moved to online forms and web forms and PDFs. And so that to me is digitization, where the paperwork trail is now in the cloud, and so other people can now access it, but that person still has to walk around and say, all right, suction pressure is 75 psi. Okay, that's good. System looks good. Pump room temperature 72 degrees in here. They still have to write all that down.
right,
But moving to digitalization is when that system tells you what its pump room temperature is, and it puts it into that form for you. That system tells you what its suction pressure is, and it puts it into that form for you. If you get a diesel driven system, it tells you what the fuel level is, so that you can plan ahead and know when you need to order fuel again, because in 3 weeks time, when you run for 90 minutes over 3 weeks, you're going to drop that tank below the 2/3 required by code.
right, right.
Digitalization means that instead of somebody having to walk around and manually put that information in, they're able to gather that information automatically without having to physically walk it down. Now, there's
Right.
still some discussions on, visual indication is important and being able to see those things, but the root data at the end of the day is critical. And I think a really good example is one of our original pilot customers added digital gauge readers onto their risers effectively, and they found that their initial cap cost was fairly high, but their payback time, because they're self-insured and they're able to take the decision with their third-party auditor, that they no longer had to send somebody around to check those risers each time and walk the entire plant. Instead,
Yep.
those readings were reporting out to them, and so they, in terms of man hours, were able to redeploy that person to do something else, because these people are so busy. There's not
Yeah.
enough time in the day to do all these inspections and run all these challenges, especially if it's an in-house team
Yeah.
as opposed to an external team, right?
Right.
So people are so busy with these things that cutting out a few hours a day is immensely important.
Well, also like if you can, if you're doing quarterly, sprinkler check, on those gauges or whatever, if what happens between those quarters, if there's an issue, you're not gonna catch that. So I think with that digitalization, if it can automate a service technician to come out and fix it, right? Obviously it's not going to be able to fix itself a lot of times. So if you can automate a service technician to come out before something critical happens, like once you hit that degradation point, boom, fire, fire a service ticket out to a tech to make that fix versus letting it get out of control. You know, I could see it on dry systems, and there's some technology out there to kind of start monitoring dry pipe systems where, you let that go too long, you're going to get a false trip and water frozen everywhere. You know what I
Sure.
mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and I think it's an important point to make that, you'll always need to roll a technician, but you'll
Yeah.
know what you're rolling a technician for at that moment because you'll know exactly what the issue is. And it's not something that you're finding on the inspection because you know of it in between inspections
Right.
effectively.
Yeah, the visual components, I mean, you're always going to need technicians there.
Hmm.
That, even on a, I mean, on a no flow, you're still going to need somebody there, right? Visually, does the automated or the remote monitoring piece of FireConnect, it doesn't get, it doesn't eliminate that churn test fully, right?
Yeah, right now, I mean, so the way code's written is remote testing needs to be as good as, if not better than somebody physically being there.
Right.
What you're going to find, so right now we're really pulling all the data, but you're still you're not gathering the things like the eye and the ear test at the
Yes.
moment, right? So if that pump's running or that
Or
diesel
the
engine's
smell
running,
test, right?
exactly, exactly. But all of that can come and is roadmap to come. So you'll start seeing things like cameras in pump rooms for visual indication. And you'll start looking at, there's already tech out there that tells you vibration, noise, and bearing temp, for example. So you throw one of those sensors on your fire pump and you throw one on your engine. And now all of a sudden you've also replaced, that potential required visual indication as well here. So I think in reality, what's going to happen is somebody will go in, they'll start that test, and then they can be there if they need to be, or they can go while the data is collecting and go and do something
Yeah.
else in the
Yeah.
interim, what
Exactly.
that they would need to accomplish. And then if there's an issue, they're there, they can go deal with it. At the same time, all that data is already there. So you'll continue to see this base platform that we have. You'll start to iterate and add more sensor technology that leads to a more robust inspection. So the goal at the end of the day is that NFPA 25 checklist for your weekly or monthly that you need to perform specifically in your fire pump system. The goal would be to allow for all of that to be digitalized effectively.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So component, I guess what is it, we keep talking about the smart and cloud and everything's like invisible in the air, right? So I always describe the cloud as just like it's
Yeah, you look up and
right. You look up, right?
yeah,
So I guess what is, everybody knows, you got your pump, you have your controller. What I guess what are the hardware components to, and then we'll get to the software after that. What are the hardware components to FireConnect?
for sure, for sure. And so FireConnect has two different versions. One which is a more basic version that we call Sentry, and then a more robust version that we call Guardian. And Sentry was really designed to aid the retrofit side of the market, especially with regard to commercial buildings. The root of the data, the vast majority of the data that comes from into FireConnect comes from the fire pump controllers. You get all,
Okay.
you have your standard alarms, but behind all those alarms, there's 70 to 100 different points of data that those controllers also have.
Yep.
That is information you can pull. And so what we've done with FireConnect is we connect to those controllers via Modbus.
Okay.
So we get all that data via Modbus from the fire pump controller, and then we add things like, so you get system pressure out of that controller for example, and then you add a suction transducer. So we add that piece of hardware in there. So now you're able to see your differential pressure. So
Yep.
in terms of plotting a pump curve, if you're running a
Yeah.
test, making sure that you have suction pressure, that somebody didn't accidentally close a valve, upstream, for example. That information is now coming, and then you can add additional features. So like pump room temperature monitoring. That's a great example.
Yep.
Pulling that data in. You can add a flow meter. So what we've done is we've actually put an ultrasonic flow meter on the suction side of the pump. And what that's yielded us is both flow data if you're running an annual test. So if you're running a flow test or a test header, for example, but it's also given us, data in the event of a live event. So in a fire, in an incident, if you're popping
Yep.
sprinkler heads, you're flowing water, we can tell you how that fire pump's performing. And that's we can talk about that a little bit later here with regard, we call that incident command.
Yep.
And then there's other components. So if you got a water supply tank, a water storage tank, we can tell you tank level remotely, similarly. If you've got a diesel fuel tank, same deal. We can tell you how much fuel is in that tank, not just a low alarm. So the controller will give you a low fuel level alarm, but why not know how much is in there so that we talk about getting proactive in a future state and rolling a technician if an issue happens automatically? Why not be able to send a PO out for the diesel fuel delivery company that you work for, knowing that you're going to need fuel in a week or something along those lines?
Right.
So that those hardware components that that I mentioned here, suction transducer, connecting Modbus, the flow meter is a big one. All this is wired into what we call the FireConnect gateway controller.
Okay.
And within that is a cellular gateway board. So it's an
Oh,
IoT.
it's cellular.
It's all cellular. So it's an
Oh, you
IoT
didn't go
board
Wi-Fi.
with the SIM card. And we didn't go Wi-Fi and we didn't go local network connection, because the biggest concern that we found so far, especially with our industrial partners, is connecting hardware behind their firewall.
I know, yeah, and that's how. I mean, that's how Target got hacked. What, 5 years ago? That was through their HVAC IoT system. So
They don't love that.
no, they
So
don't.
what we do is we're taking it's read only what we're doing. So we're taking the Modbus data. It's read only. We're not doing any writing. We're not doing any controlling of the pump or the controllers or anything like that. And we're pulling that data through into this gateway controller and sending it up to the cloud via cellular. Now, what we've also, you talk about hardware, we've iterated on that gateway controller. And what we've done is we've always found that typically you get a lot of data out of your jockey pumps and your jockey pump controller, because that's the pump that runs all the time. Your fire pump doesn't run all the time.
Right.
But when you're looking at system health, watching what your jockey pump does, that's a leading indicator of things like potential leaks, for example. If a leak's coming, or if somebody's washing their truck down at 11 p.m. at night or something like that, which we know that happens too.
Right.
So what we've done is we've taken a jockey pump controller and we've actually taken the IoT portion of our hardware and put that in a jockey controller. So it's a simplified installation.
Oh, wow.
It's more cost effective. You don't have a separate enclosure. And then with that, you get all the jockey pump monitoring information there. And then you can still connect that to your Modbus enabled main fire pump controller. But the beauty is, if you don't have a Modbus main fire pump controller, we can also still give you a smart fire protection system by connecting the jockey to your existing fire pump controller.
Right.
And what we do there is we take your core remote alarm contacts that you would normally send through your building to your BMS or whatever. So you got electric, phase failure, phase reversal, trouble, etc. We land those alarms into the jockey controller, and then we monitor those remotely as well.
Wow.
So there's a lot there, right? But the point is we've iterated our own solution into a more, installer-friendly, cost-friendly opportunity.
What are you using? So I know cellular connections, tough time in fire pump rooms. Are you putting not repeaters, but or do you have a mesh networks, or how I guess how are you getting the data back if you don't have cellular?
Yeah, for sure. So we haven't run into a pump room yet that we haven't been able to get data out of. But there's a few different ways. But you have to work around it sometimes.
Okay.
So buried pump room in the basement, is a challenge, and that's very common. So we have a cellular antenna that's just a little nub antenna that's on the board. But then you've got the option to run a wired antenna out of that controller, and you can run it wherever you need to. So 50 feet, you've got 50 feet of length basically on the long cable. And so if you need to run it up 1 or 2 floors, that's usually enough to get what you need to. Sometimes if you run it if you've got a remote pump house, sometimes if you run it just right outside of the pump house, also great. So that's really been our solution. There is an opportunity if you need to do repeaters, but we've found that typically the path of least resistance for us and the strongest signal has been to find where that signal works and then run an antenna to it. Gotcha.
I had another question lined up for you. So you have the gateway. Oh, this was a question. So, all right. Obviously, there's a lot of fire pumps that are currently in the market, and is the idea obviously anything new coming out? Obviously, you should be getting some kind of connected. So you work with a variety of different controllers as well. It's not just Peerless, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So Peerless is obviously being the pump manufacturer, and we do have our own jockey controller. But in terms of UL and FM fire pump controllers, we leave that to we call them the experts. So Tornatec, FireTroll, Eaton, and Master, mostly the 4 main ones in the U.S. at this point that you'll find, especially with regard to new business. We're compatible with all of them.
Oh, wow.
and as a standard now, so on all their new controllers, they're all Modbus ready out of the
Oh,
gate.
nice.
So the previous iterations, 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, did not. You had the option to add Modbus to some of these, but it didn't come as standard. So on every
Gotcha.
new installation now, you have the opportunity to pull that data out.
To do this.
It's kind of the older controllers that, that's why we have this differentiation between Sentry and Guardian, just because there's some controllers out there that may be fine, they're 7 years old, but they're not Modbus capable, or it's cost prohibitive to upgrade that controller. We can still give you a lot of data even if you leave that there. But everything new that comes out of the building can be connected at this point.
So, I grabbed the question again in my mind. So, all right, you have an installation contractor, obviously, whatever, 5 years old, that puts the fire pump in. Obviously, they're selling that to the building,
Mhm.
right? Now, who who's going to do the install? I mean, is it going to be the building owner that wants to get more connected, or is it the servicing contractor that wants to be more connected? You kind
I
of get
think,
where you kind of
yeah,
know where I'm getting at, because you have your building owner, which
yeah,
might not necessarily care them, and they just want to reduce their cost.
for
But
sure.
then on the service contractor side, it's like, all right, I can provide this value. So what if the service contractor owned the gateway and almost like leased it out to the building? I don't know. I'm just trying to think of a variety of scenarios. I know you have facilities that are currently using this now.
Yeah.
I'm wondering to see where the service contractor fits in.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think what we're finding is the sprinkler contract. So first off, sprinkler contractors are the ones that install the equipment.
Yep.
If the end user wants it, they'll contract out the contractor, and they'll have it installed on their behalf. That's the model that we've seen for years here. But now you've also got these service contractors that are obviously very engaged and care very much about the performance of that system,
Yeah.
both from an inspections and a repair standpoint. So there's absolutely a market there, an opportunity as well for these service-minded contractors to basically purchase remote monitoring equipment such as FireConnect and install it, whether it's on behalf of their end user or for the service that they're going to provide their end user.
Right.
Because if they can become more effective, think about this. So a battery goes bad in a diesel engine, for example. That comes through as a common trouble alarm. End user says, I've got a common trouble alarm. They call their sprinkler, the contractor of the service agreement with and say, hey, I've got this common trouble alarm. First thing that the contractor has to do is roll somebody out there to figure out what is causing that common trouble alarm, for
Right.
example. But if they have already installed, if as part of their service package, they've decided to install remote monitoring of their system, they actually know that it's a bad battery that's driving that problem. So instead of sending somebody out there to figure out what the problem is, go back, get in the truck, go to the shop, get a battery, come back and install it. They can roll the truck to that site with a battery. And
Yeah.
typically, a lot of these contracts can be flat fee, right? A performance
Yeah.
contract can be a flat fee. So then you're looking at cost savings from, as a company, as a service company, effectively, by having to roll somebody once as opposed to twice.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see it, obviously valuable to a high-end facility, or, a facility manager that has the wherewithal to get into it. But I think majority of the market, and commercial and even industrial and whatever else, they're using third-party contractors to do that. So,
Mhm.
um, I think by utilizing this technology, obviously it's a potential labor savings. Um, but you're going to run it. I mean, you're going to run analytics, and we're not getting rid of. You're still going to have technicians there, definitely for the
Always,
annual, right?
absolutely, always.
So, and I think
You're making them
there's a
more
little bit of a
efficient.
fear,
Yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah.
market sometimes.
You're not replacing jobs at all, right?
No.
You're not removing them. You're making them more efficient for them to do the work at the end of
Yes.
the day. Either way, that guy's got to roll. He's got to physically be there to replace the battery.
Yes. Yes.
That's
Exactly.
the root of it, right? So, but
Yeah.
he knows what he's getting into when he gets there, and then
Right.
he can plan his day accordingly as well. If he knows that he just has to replace the battery, then he can go on to the next site later that day. Whereas if he
Yeah.
doesn't know what the problem is, a lot of times that blocks his day out completely.
Right.
So
Right.
you're making them more effective from that
Yeah.
standpoint.
What is how have you seen adoption so far? Where have successes been, and where, I guess, where are you still struggling with people getting on top of
Yeah,
it?
for sure, for sure. Our strongest market, without a doubt, right now is the retrofit market.
Yep.
And a lot of that's driven either by talking to, service-minded contractors or also to end users, effectively what we would call key accounts. And when we talk about key accounts, the value proposition for a lot of those places, some is tied to the specific facility manager that's on site,
Mhm.
but a lot of times it's tied to, corporations that have like a corporate governance model. So
Yep.
they've got somebody that's responsible for fire protection at their, their portfolio of sites all over the country or all over the world. They care about, code and compliance and making sure that their individual site leaders are, are doing the testing, or they struggle with keeping site leaders on staff. And so that there's a gap there in terms of information. They're really the first ones to help kick that off, kick FireConnect off with us effectively, is that corporate governance model. So that's been the root of our success up to this point. Sprinkler model, service model is a big one. And then the laggard, as I would call it, is the new construction bid and spec model. And that's just because of the nature of classic bid and spec, right?
Yeah.
So you got to work with an end user who can, and an engineer, and the engineer can justify, the little bit of the extra cost that comes from a little bit of additional hardware, and then the monitoring piece. The beauty, though, is because now most fire pump controllers, or all fire pump controllers, are Modbus enabled, the additional incremental cost for a new system is just a couple $1,000s to get you off the ground
Oh,
for a
nice.
new install,
So that's what
especially
the
using
gate
that
that's what the gateway is, a couple thousand, and
with
then
the jockey
obviously
controller,
install.
right? So if
Yep.
you use a jockey controller, that gives you a smart system, and it gives you everything you need right out of the gate. So you connect that to your main fire pump controller, and we built in a lot of functionality. So like that suction transducer, you don't have to wire that in the field. That's already installed in the jockey controller. Pump room temperature, water storage tank monitoring. That's all in one box. So we've simplified the installation piece of it as well. So the upfront cap cost is minimal at this point
Sure.
on a new. But that, admittedly, that is the laggard, because that's such a long cycle, because you're talking about bid and spec, getting
Yeah.
something into a specification, and then the time from the bid, and then, construction, and so on and so forth. So
Yeah, I almost think I mean, it'd be interesting if I was a service or inspection contractor. I mean, if you could do it, you could install one of these on a obviously a site that is having issues or whatever.
mhm.
Um, you probably can't move them around too much. Probably once it's installed, it's
Well,
installed. What is there
the beauty is they're
data or
non.
software cost of it, or is it just
Sorry, say that again.
is there like you're transmitting a lot of data? Is there a cost to that, or is there like a
Yeah, so there's an annual monitoring
subscription?
fee attached
Okay,
to it, a
cool.
subscription, right? And so
Yep.
it's somewhere around $1,200 to $1,800 a year, depending upon the complexity of the system and how many installations you have. But that's an all-in-one fee, so you don't have to worry about, I said it's cellular, so it's not like you have to go to Verizon and set up a data account or anything like that. Like that's all taken care of, and then that gives you access to. We haven't really talked much yet about the software, the user interface, but that gets you access to the user interface. That gives you unlimited users onto that user interface. And then it also gives you all of those notifications we were talking about. So if you want a text message that your pump is on, you can set that up, and all that is all included in that fee as well.
Gotcha. So that's just one that's one gateway though, right?
Correct. Yes. And
Yeah.
so the cut and the tie-in right now with the current hardware, it's similar to a main fire pump controller, where you need one controller per fire pump.
Yep.
So you've got one gateway per fire pump. And I think it's probably an important point to note now that 40% of what Peerless monitors, and yes, we are Peerless FireConnect and Peerless Pumps, but 40% of what we monitor are non-Peerless fire pumps.
Oh, wow.
So the software itself is what we call pump agnostic.
Gotcha.
So you can install it on anybody's fire pump. And if you're playing with one of those 4 controller manufacturers, which 95% of the new market is at this point, then you can tie into there as well.
Nice. Yeah, it's pretty slick. I've seen the UI, I think a couple years ago when Roger was showing me, or when I
Mhm.
forgot what was looking at it, but it's obviously a lot more sophisticated now.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's never done, right? So this is a massive change from 100-year-old cast iron pump manufacturer who does product development, sales releases a product, and that product is on the market for 30 years, right? That
yeah.
pattern and whatever. For digital, the hardware is ever evolving. We're constantly adding sensors and opportunities from a hardware standpoint. The real meat of it is that hardware enables the software. And that software is what is constantly iterating. So perfect example, we had a customer, and monitoring jockey pump starts we found is a critical component to knowing system health. So if you look over time at how often a jockey pump starts, you can tell if it's pretty consistent, or if you've popped a valve, or you've blown an elbow, or you got a leaky check or something, right? You can tell when that jockey pump starts to start more times over a day than it has over the previous 7, for example. And so we had a customer that said, we have what we think is a significant problem at one of our facilities. They've got 200 plus starts per day. We'd like to know, roughly how much water they're losing on an annualized basis with that pump running, that jockey running 200 times a day for, whatever minute at a time. Can you help us with that? We're thinking about putting a flow meter on there. I'm like, oh, yeah, you don't need to put a flow meter on there. Like, we can solve it with software. So in the UI, we updated it where we're giving, based on the rating of that jockey pump, we can give you a very accurate estimate in terms of how much water is flowing through that jockey pump each day, and then annualize that over, a year, basically, effectively, and say, all right, you're losing 1.2 million gallons of water per year.
Put a dollar value on that. And
Put a dollar value on it, or, so if somebody's got an environmental goal, that's, obviously an easy low-hanging fruit, but even from a fire protection standpoint, so you get a really leaky system here, it's time to start looking at some CapEx to fix it. And so they use that to justify that 1.2 million gallons a year, to justify CapEx for it. And they went from 200 starts a day to 10 once they spent the money to update it. The point is that was a software fix, and we validated it. They put a flow meter on there anyways, and I think we were within 5% of the flow meter. So from a good enough, standpoint of what is the, if they're asking the question, what's the goal, I guess, what are they trying to get to? That's how we solved it effectively. And so we do that pretty frequently by doing software updates. And the beauty is once you're already in with the subscription, you're not necessarily paying for all these additional, these bolt-on features. Like if there's a hardware requirement, then you probably have to pay to add in that hardware, but we're making all the software changes, free to whoever wants to use it. So now everybody has a jockey flow calculator, for example, on every site.
Yeah, it's you're in our ball game now, where you're putting out 20 new features every month and having it just ever growing. Obviously your team has to grow. You're getting probably more software calls than hardware. I mean, obviously you're gonna have the hardware calls, but they're software calls are a little bit different, no, that's great. Yeah, and I'm obviously, we're looking at, I would love to grab some of this data to obviously populate some stuff that we're doing inside our Inspect Point application, because obviously it'll optimize that, and then we can roll trucks automatically. So there's some really good stuff, and I've been waiting to have you guys come to market with a lot of stuff. So I think it's great timing with everything happening.
I completely agree. And I mean, you look at the future of where we see smart fire protection going. Step one is getting that data and remote monitoring. Step two is what do you actually do with that data?
Right.
And throwing it into, building monitoring services and, their building management systems, and into inspection platforms like Inspect Point, for example, is next stage, I think, next step. And then how do you use that data to impact activity? So cutting POs, rolling trucks, knowing what the problem is, getting smart. So knowing that you run your weekly pump test at churn, and being able to see from a data standpoint that you've now degraded to 7%, for example. So saying, hey, it's time to order, a rotating element or a repair kit or something along those lines. Letting the pumps, in essence, because they're being monitored, order their own spare parts. Knowing that they need to do something, right? So, all right, it's been 2 years. You've had this many starts. Time to replace the bearings or replace the packing. Your jockey pumps run 200,000 times. It's probably time to put one on the shelf, because you're going to want to be replacing that pretty soon.
That's crazy. My HVAC system almost does that, and it's an older system, but I've got it connected to thermostat, and it'll automatically order air filters, off of how much it's running.
So exactly. And so our parent company, Grunfus, has a CR booster pump that in essence does that. You can order a stack kit or a new seal, or the booster system itself can order new parts because it's condition, it's doing condition monitoring on everything. That's
Yeah.
the next stage here for this. It's going to require less, individual input, but will still always require somebody to go there and
Oh yeah.
fix
Yeah.
it,
Yeah. Yeah.
replace it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a constant.
No, no, this is great stuff. So I would like, I'm gonna tease this now, but we kind of talked, Travis and I were talking before, and I think we're gonna do a kind of a joint webinar in December. So any listeners out there, please, we'll probably get a date set up in the next couple weeks, but probably by the time this podcast airs too. But just to kind of give some more detailed ins and outs of kind of your user interface and kind of just the basics of, and maybe we'll go over an example of an existing fire pump where you would like, whether it's the facility manager or it's the installer or the service contractor, right? And we can kind of go through I guess what you need to do, right, to get it going.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's going to be that'll be fun, and looking forward to showing it off. And Drew, let me this went really quick, so let me just give one additional shameless plug to functionality, because we spent a lot of time talking
Yeah,
about the
sure.
remote monitoring and the inspection testing portion of this, which obviously is critical to your business as well. But FireConnect was born with this idea in mind that during a live incident, you need to be able to understand what's going on with your fire pump.
Yep.
So we've seen in the past couple of years some pretty bad instances of buildings that are sprinklered with fire pumps, where one of the first activities that happens during a live event during a fire is that fire pump's turned off, for example,
Yeah.
whether it's to gain visibility or for whatever litany of reasons. NFPA 13 notwithstanding, don't turn the fire pump off to improve visibility. What we've done with FireConnect is we can give you that data, and we have a page that we call Incident Command, and that's for everybody. And so if there's an event, if you pop a sprinkler head open, you will see that pump running, you will see what that flow rate is, and if you have a water supply tank, you'll know how much water you have remaining in the tank, and based on current performance, how much longer you have of supply for that fire pump. And so the implication of that is, think about this. You open one sprinkler head, pump turns on, and you've got flow. Over time, so if you're looking at time on a graph, that flow is constant, right? Coming out of that sprinkler head. If you open a second head, that flow rate jumps up, and then over time, it's constant again. You're looking for suppression. You're looking for no more sprinkler heads to open. So over time, if you've, say 10, 15 minutes, you've got a flat flow curve on that pump curve, you now know that you are no longer opening sprinkler heads.
That's
And
great.
one of the, it's still an estimate or an assumption, but you can make a fairly safe assumption that that fire at this point is no longer spreading, that it's contained to that suppression area. That data is available today, and it's our pilot customers have it as part of their EHS, so their environmental health and safety requirements, that if there's an event at their facility, whoever is responsible during that time, their job is to take that data to the fire brigade and say, here's what's going on with the fire pump right now. They have it on the iPad and they show it and say, this is the live performance. It's coming out every 20 seconds out of the pump room. Here's the update. Here's pressure. We've got good suction pressure. Here's what the system pressure is, and here's the flow rate right now. For me, the end goal is at some point that data is available on the trucks as they're rolling, as the fire department's on their way. But that's obviously based on adoption and down the line. But at a minimum, those fire site leaders all have that data available to them. They can say the pump's working, leave it alone, don't turn it off, let it do its job.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of incident command software platforms out there now where you know the 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 chief or whoever's responding to that, the truck rolling up to that fire, they already have that in front of them on an
Yep,
iPad or an
exactly.
iPhone or whatever. So, if you could send obviously that data in that, the more information, the better they can fight that fire, right?
100%. It's safer for everybody. You can make better choices. It reduces overall risk entirely. The beauty is we can send that data wherever we need to. We've already done it
Nice.
before. So whatever platforms need it or want it, that is an opportunity.
That's cool. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
That was
Um,
my plug. Thank you, though.
that's not a plug.
That's a good one.
That's
I
a
think
good
that's a
feature.
really important one to think about here moving forward, too.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
good. Um, what I guess, yeah, I guess we could hit more in the webinar that we do, but yeah, I wanted to get, I've been wanting to get you on here for a while and talk about FireConnect, and it's been kind of in the back of my mind for a bunch of years now, and how to bring that into just the next wave, right? And getting that data into obviously ITM reporting, but even beyond that, and sending service tickets and ordering material ahead of time. So you just show up and make those fixes, and then they're off to the next thing.
Right.
So
Perfect.
cool. Well, stay tuned. We'll have this webinar in December out, and yeah, I guess Travis, where can we find you? Any other plugs? Get a hold of you? Anybody at FireConnect?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best thing to do is you go to peerlesspump.com, and the first link you'll see is FireConnect right there. You can click FireConnect and you can find all the information that we have about the system. There's this pretty slick video that gives you a quick 2-minute intro into what FireConnect is. There's an ask for more information button, so you can send us an email and we can reach out to you there. We're also pretty active on, you'll find us on LinkedIn, so Peerless Pump or Peerless Fire Connect as well there. But definitely start with the website, and happy to field any questions. So feel free to reach out to me, and we can provide contact information as well on the blog post and tie it to the podcast here.
Awesome.
Good.
Well, thanks again for
Yeah,
hopping
thanks
on
for
today,
having
and
me.
we'll
This is a
I'm sure
pleasure.
we'll see each other soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
All right, thanks. This has been episode 47 of the Fire Protection Podcast, powered by InspectPoint. I want to thank my guest again, Travis Montembeault from Peerless, and obviously FireConnect. It was really cool to kind of see what they have coming down the line, and really next year there's going to be a lot of push toward this, and I think more contractors and facilities are going to start using this technology to their advantage. And it's obviously already in a lot of the NFPA 25 codes. So yeah, appreciate everybody, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks.